All right, and now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today. Nancy Frey is a professor of educational leadership at San Diego State and a teacher leader at Health Sciences High and Middle College. She is a member of the International Literacy Association's Literacy Research Panel. Her published titles include Visible Learning in Literacy, This is Balanced Literacy, Removing Labels, PLC Plus, a Playbook for Instructional Leaders, How Scaffolding Works, and Onboarding Teachers. Nancy is a credentialed special educator, reading specialist and administrator in California, and learns from teachers and students every day. Aida Allen-Rotell is currently a full-time professional learning consultant for Corwin and a teaching clinician. She was previously a bilingual teacher in an elementary school where she taught grades K through 6 for 15 years, as well as a high school special educator, academic coach, coordinator for services for multilingual learners, and administrators. She holds teaching and administrative services credentials in California and earned her master's degree in education from San Diego State University. She's led efforts to improve student learning, which resulted in her school earning academic distinction for impacting the lives of students living in poverty, becoming a Visible Learning Plus Gold certified school, and improving academic language for multilingual learners. She also served as an advisor to many high school clubs. She was the student government advisor and led students to championships for 10 years in Health Occupation Students Association competition. She is dedicated to developing teacher and leadership mindsets for diverse learning populations. Aida is also the co-author of PLC Plus, a Playbook for Instructional Leaders. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Nancy. Go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you. And Aida, I'm so happy that we get to talk about professional learning communities. I mean, this is something that we write about, we present about, but I think most importantly, it is something that has been a core practice at the school where you and I are as well. And the thing is that professional learning communities have actually been around, I think, longer than most people actually appreciate. Many people first ran into professional learning communities in the 1990s, but it actually goes back much further than that. It actually started in conversation in the education field in the 1960s. Now, we could pause and we could play the game of, can you name all those people? I can, but some of you are much younger and maybe you can't name all of them. But in the 1960s, there was a big concern educationally about teacher isolation and the fact that the practice very much was that teachers reported to work in the morning, they punched in or signed in, however it was they did, they went to their classroom, they did what it was that they needed to do during the day, and then they left. And there was very little contact professionally among teachers. Certainly socially, there always have been important friendships and relationships, but the idea that teachers would actually come together and would talk about their practice, that just simply did not exist. It was not common at all. And so there were a number of researchers, again, going back all of these decades now, who said, we've got to be able to figure out some structures that help to interrupt all of that teacher isolation. And so over the next 15 years or so, there were lots of different models and so on. But what really brought professional learning communities to the forefront really occurred with this particular report in 1985. And what Rosenholz was able to do was to follow a number of schools to be able to look at not only what were the important results in terms of adults, affiliation, and so on, but also in looking at how this seemed to impact students. So it was just beginning during that time. But one of the things that Rosenholz noted is that improving teaching is a collective rather than an individual enterprise, and that analysis, evaluation, and experimentation in concert with colleagues are conditions under which teachers improve. The focus at this time was especially on teacher development and the recognition that none of us have the bandwidth to work with a single teacher at a time and hope that that's going to make a change. Again, this advanced even further with Judith Little and Maubrey McLaughlin's work around PLCs in the early 1990s. And what they began to collect were what some of the conditions are, the common conditions that are present in effective professional learning communities, including this idea that there is this set of shared norms and beliefs, relationships, of course, being important, and having that culture of collaboration, reflection, and so on. But importantly, too, they noted that there's got to be this ongoing technical inquiry. And they were really the first ones to introduce this idea in professional learning communities of inquiry, as well as professional growth for the teachers, and this mutuality of what happened when teachers come together. They noted as well, we're closer to the truth about school improvement than ever before. The most promising strategy for sustained, substantive school improvement is developing the capacity of school personnel to function as a professional learning community. Again, another important study that was done, and this was a big one because now it involved 1,200 schools. And this is now dating back to the mid-1990s. And what they noted were in this study that the most successful schools were those that used restructuring tools to help them function as professional learning communities. So we're really starting to see this just continued emphasis. Shirley Hord, who at the time was a university researcher and eventually joined the National Professional Development Council, now known as Learning Forward. She talked about what are those characteristics of continuous inquiry. And Aida, as you know, we still use Shirley Hord's 6 characteristics within our professional learning communities as part of the way in which teams renorm themselves every year. And what she noted in particular is how important it is for those characteristics to be in place. In 1998, Rick DeFore, who was at the time principal of a suburban Chicago high school, embraced the work in the field around professional learning communities, and he began to develop at his own high school what these would look like. And many of us are familiar what has now become that model of professional learning communities at work. Important work that was done during that time. And many of you are familiar with these 4 questions as a means to be able to drive that work. So that model has been around for a couple of decades now for doing so. But I'll also couch my comments in the context of all of those researchers that I just talked about. All of that work was done before there were standards. Yes, youngsters, there was a time when we all taught without standards. I know it's hard to believe now. That's what the world was like whenever I entered the field as well. There weren't any standards. And so when at that time you coupled this teacher isolation with the fact that we really didn't have any kind of agreement from one classroom to the next, let alone one school district to the next. It was really important to be able to ask that question, what do we want students to learn? However, we have content standards now. We've had content standards now for in most places dating back to the late 1990s. We don't have to decide anymore. We don't get to decide, quite frankly, what it is that we want students to learn. Those have been articulated quite clearly by any number of commissions, organizations, states, and so on that have organized those content standards. We don't need to keep talking about that, right? There was a time when this is the way we listened to music because this was the technology. There was a time when it was really important to ask, what do we want students to learn? But just like we've changed how it is that we listen to music, we also have shifted how it is that we think about what it is that professional learning communities can do. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to put a slide up here, and it's got a couple of different graphics on it. Each of them have a letter to them, and the graphics that are up here are all mathematical graphs. And what I'd like for you to contemplate, whether you've been in education since dirt was invented, like me, or whether you've been in it for a hot minute, I'd like for you to think about what your journey has been around professional learning communities. What's it been like for you? And go ahead and drop into the chat the letter that best corresponds with your own experiences. Ready? Go.
It's kind of mathy. I like it, Nancy.
It is kind of mathy. And all of our math educators are going, really mathy? Is that a word?
I just did the reading, teaching reading. I didn't do the teaching math institute.
I see a lot of A's, a lot of swinging back and forth and back and forth. Glad to see some G's that are in there as well, where that trajectory is going upward.
I see some D's. Did you see? There's D's. Flatline it. I see that. A's, a lot of A's. G.
Yeah, and I think those D's sometimes are of a particular concern, right? That I think, and Aida and I have certainly have spoken about this before too, that in teacher preparation programs, and by the way, for anybody who works in a teacher preparation program, there's a lot of teaching that you have to do in a very short amount of time. Sometimes I will hear people say, well, the problem is the teacher preparation programs. I disagree. That's a good start. No question about it. That's a good start to be able to do so. But as educators, and as institutions and organizations, we're also responsible for the continued professional learning that goes on. And one of the things that student teachers don't get in teacher preparation programs is how to be in a professional learning community. There's just too much other stuff that needs to be addressed during that time. And so what typically happens is that teachers come into their first job, wherever the first school is that they get hired to do. Somebody says to them on the staff, hey, we do PLCs every Wednesday morning. And that young person may very well be saying, what is a PLC? Oh, it's a professional learning community. We do them on Wednesday mornings. Just follow me and I'll show you what it is to do. And whatever is happening in that particular organization, what they call a professional learning community becomes, for that novice teacher, oh, this must be the way teachers work together.
So Nancy, I'm going to tell you something, a secret. So I started teaching in 1990. I moved back to San Diego, and at the school I was at, probably about 97, they started saying I had no experience with PLCs. And so probably for the first 3 years, I thought PLCs were a time for me to have delicious snacks and with my friends. And I'm being very honest with you. And it wasn't just me, it was the entire, so I totally remember saying the letters PLC, but I wasn't really sure what we were supposed to do there.
Yes.
So I'm going to be transparent. I think we have other people that might feel like we're doing a PLC, but we all have our own definition, and sometimes it might be a little watered down.
A lot of drift can
Yeah.
happen. It's kind of like playing the telephone game, where you whisper a message into one person's ear and then they keep whispering all around the circle. And by the time it comes back to you, it bears little resemblance to what your original message was. And I think in some cases, that's what's happened with professional learning communities. Anything that is a meeting in some places has been labeled a professional learning community. And what we're here for today, especially, is to really kind of reset what it is that looks like. Going all the way back to the 1960s, although they didn't have the term for it at the time, the researchers from the very beginning understood that we can build some collective efficacy into what happens in our professional learning communities. And Albert Bandura talked about collective efficacy, that shared belief that a group has that they can execute the course of action. I love that. Required to produce given levels of attainment. It's a group of people. This group believes in their abilities. And this group does whatever it takes to be able to achieve their goal. And I think what's really important about this is that collective teacher efficacy is not rah, go team, we can do it sorts of things, but it's actually based on evidence, that we have evidence that what it is that we're doing is having an impact, and that we have the capacity to be able to revise, to be able to shift where it is when we're finding out that we're not having the impact that we think that we're having. There's a lot of courage that is behind that. And collective efficacy really is collective responsibility in action. Again, this idea of collective responsibility has certainly been well researched. I put just a couple of studies up there, but here's the really interesting thing. The collective responsibility and the collective efficacy of teachers has a direct impact on how it is that students achieve. There is a direct through line to all of that. One of the studies that I wanted to mention was about, and this was done a couple of years ago, among 8th graders who had to repeat algebra in 9th grade. And this is from the National Longitudinal Study, so huge database, right? And these students were followed in terms of their attainment and so on throughout their high school career. Here's the really interesting thing. Among students who repeated algebra in 8th grade, the collective responsibility of their teachers was predictive of their mathematics grades throughout high school, especially among males. And when we're talking about collective responsibility, it's not just the math teachers, right? It's the collective responsibility of the faculty at the school. Stephanie Hirsch has written quite a bit about collective responsibility for Learning Forward. And she notes some characteristics for that. It's a shared commitment to each student's success, not just the ones that are on your roster. Teachers share what's working. Aida, how many meetings have you been to in your career where the 60-minute meeting included 55 minutes of admiring the problem, followed by 5 minutes of calendar rodeo when we figure out when it is that we're going to meet again to do more admiring of the problem?
Yep. It's, we don't really, I always say this, We're in the field of teaching and learning, but we don't like to really talk about what's working and what's not. Right?
Yeah,
It's always
exactly.
it's so interesting to me. But yes, I love calendar rodeo. It's kind of like a fun game.
Exactly, right? We have to talk about what is working, not just where the gaps are, because otherwise we never get to the point of being able to understand what it is that we need to duplicate or intensify or expand. Hirsch also talks about that around collective responsibility. It's about teachers as well, that we don't allow a single teacher to fail in their attempt to ensure the success of a student. And that teachers with less experience, hello to all of you new members of the profession, we're so glad that you are here. We owe you a lot. Teachers with less experience deserve to realize that other teachers are invested in their success. And when that happens, students benefit from the wisdom and the expertise of all of their teachers, even those who never have them in any class or course. And this idea of consistency, collective responsibility is huge. I was at an elementary school in the Bronx a couple of December, a couple months ago. This is Concourse Village Elementary School. They are located in the poorest congressional district in the United States, and they have extraordinary academic results with their students, posting test scores at their elementary school that exceed 95% of the schools in the New York City Department of Education. Extraordinary. And so Doug and I felt like we had to go see it ourselves. And we brought a film crew along with us. Well, film crew. Peter is his name. It's the whole crew. Peter is the whole crew. And I hold the microphone, the boom. For him. So that's the crew. But we got to be able to spend some time there with them. And this shared responsibility matters. And it comes across to students and it comes across to families. Let's take a look.
How are you, friend? You okay? Good morning. Banana, apple. Frey, a reminder about your schedule swap. Okay, you have your first period specialty. 302, have a great day. 502, have a great day.
Good morning again, 302 Scholars, and happy Fabulous Friday. It is another beautiful day in the Bronx. Our school community is happy that you're here today. We have perfect attendance.
I believe the daily routines are super important because it gives a structure to students, and students strive on structure. They come in and they know exactly what they have to do. It isn't a surprise, and they know that once I finish dancing, I'm gonna have the morning message, I'm gonna meditate, and then I'm gonna start my day.
Let us stand up and recite our Scholars Creed.
I am a Concourse Village Scholar, destined for success, educated by the best teachers on earth. Ultimately, my achievements will leave a lasting impression on the world.
All right, let's get started and let's meditate to set our day.
Let's take one deep breath in through our nose, hold it, and release through your mouth. Initiate your intentions.
I am filled with joy. I feel confident and powerful.
Now get ready to have a great day.
And extraordinary school, and they use professional learning communities in order to be able to figure out what are those consistent practices that we want to make sure are present in every grade level. And it's not just those ones that we've shown to you. There are response cards that are consistent all across the grade levels. Every classroom that I would go into, the response cards were the same. There are routines that are the same. There's a sense of urgency around their teaching that is the same. There's a collective responsibility among the teachers for every child in that school. The teachers feel it, the students feel it, the families feel it, and it really pays off what it is that they are capable of doing. And the idea of PLC Plus in particular is to be able to foster what that collective efficacy and collective responsibility looks like for teachers. And Aida, I know you're going to talk about what those ways in which we drive that investigation cycle.
Yes, and so the five driving questions through the PLC Plus are written. I'm sorry, my dog just started barking, of course, because this is the story of my life. But the 5 questions are written in order. I always like to say this. Can you click, Nance? But they do not require sequential order. Unlike cooking, though I don't cook, but I hear on the streets of people that do cook that you have to go in order to make something. But I love this because I think a lot of times we get stuck on making sure we go in sequential order. And what I say is you got to look at what you need and what kids need. So just a second, please, just to hold. Okay, we're good. So this is awesome. And I think Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid that lives on since 1984, the answer is only important if you ask the right question. And when you think about these PLC questions, you can click Nancy. It's more important. It's more than a change in the question. It's what we're doing with that question and what does it make us think about and do as a team. I cannot believe this. This is like out of a nightmare. Okay, so it's the actions are inspired by the questions. So I have been lucky, and I'm going to say this, I've been really lucky to have worked with Nancy for the past 25 years and with Doug Fisher. So I've had the opportunity to really dive into these questions and understand them as a practitioner, as someone that has led this work. And so I now understand what it means by the actions, not just the question to check off and say, well, we talked about it. So if you can click, Nancy, for me.
I'll click for you, but I want to say something first. And that is that I've been doing some work with Dylan William. And one of the things that he talks about and what you commented on really got me to thinking about that too, is that Dylan says it's great to have data-driven decisions, but we also must have decision-driven data. And that within the PLCs, there are decisions that are made by the team itself, and then they spend time collecting their evidence about what it is that's effective. Now I'll click. Go ahead. Go, Aida, go.
Stop pressuring me, Nancy Frey. Okay, so as we've all have seen the 4 questions that come from DeFore, but we say we have more than 4 questions. And our questions are, again, you don't have to do them in order, but we are going to talk about them in order. So the first question, as Nancy said, where are we going, is really based on our standards. But we push it a little bit in the sense that, click it. I wish I had clicking. We look at teacher clarity. And I know many of us have background on it, but I believe this is the question where we really look deep into understanding what are the standards asking us to do, or what are we being asked to teach. And this question sometimes personally, I feel, and I think some of you will agree with me, we jump over it too quickly. We're like, okay, I think we have to do main idea and key details, and boom. And this is the question that I feel we go back to throughout our investigation cycle, not just once. It's not we covered it, we created some success criteria, some learning intentions, got it. It really is about going back to it and seeing how is this working as we look at the other 4 questions. So click it. Thank you. And so in the process, we talk about analyzing those standards. And you'll always hear from teachers, we've already done this. And I always say, yes, but you have to do it again because you have different kids, you have different ways of looking at the standard. This is where we look at establishing the success criteria and developing learning intentions. And we have these processes in the playbook, but I really believe the big piece for me in this question is, do we know what we're being asked to teach, and how do we take kids to, and this is kind of a word I feel like we overuse, to mastery? Do we all have a collective understanding of what that means? And sometimes I feel like those are the conversations that we should have in our PLC, right? What if we all have a different understanding? It's going to look a little, I like to say a little mishmashy. I don't know if that's a word, but I call it wishy. So that is that first question. Again, it's a question you revisit throughout your investigation cycle. Where are we now? And I know Nancy's going to say, Aida, don't say this, but I feel like this is the question that we all feel that the PLC is just, this is the only thing we look at. This is where we do our data dives. This is where we look for that common challenge or our POP. This is where we might look for some, looking at those initial assessments. We talk a little bit here, not a little bit, a lot of it, on that damage of deficit thinking, right? Or implicit bias. This is where we should have more of those conversations about who is not having the success we want and what is our reality. And I call it the hot spot. This is where you find your hot spots. And sometimes PLCs will say, okay, so our kids are struggling with reading. I'm just going to be general here. And yep. And if we go really crazy, we might even say, yeah, they're struggling with vocabulary. Yep. And that's where it ends. And so this question is really tied to, what is our common challenge? Because we went back to question 1 and said, what's missing if we understand our standard? So question 2 is, where are we now? And if you think about this, these are the things that we really talk about, utilizing our initial assessment. How do we collect data, and how are we looking and analyzing it? And I say this because I have been this person. I have learned probably, and I've been teaching about 33 years, probably in the last 10 do I understand what it means to analyze data and really have conversations about it. We establish the common challenge here, or the POP. Some people call it the POP, problem of practice. But this is where we kind of decide what's going on, and now what's going to have our biggest bang for our buck. And this is hard sometimes. This is the question, and I do work with districts on this. How do we move learning forward? I do PLC Plus, and this is the question that I believe, and Nancy, you can tell me if I'm wrong because you're the boss of me, that we kind of skip. And it's the one that's going to make, this is the question that's going to lead your investigation cycle, right? What are we going to do about it? If kids are struggling with solving unknown words and we're like, yep, and then we all just go back to our classrooms and continue to do the same thing, right? then it's just a waste of time. So I always say this is the question where we get to dive into evidence-based practices. And here's where PLCs that really work well, you're comfortable enough saying, hey, I don't get it. I don't know why you keep saying reciprocal teaching, right? Why do you keep, why do you keep saying to think aloud? Does that mean I'm just thinking and I'm allowed? I mean, it really is where we get, I say nice and, I like to say we get to get messy here and we get to have those conversations. But we also look at, are we going into each other's classrooms with those learning walks or ghost walks, instructional rounds with our colleagues and having those real conversations, micro teaching, right? Recording ourselves and as a team, not looking at as we're being evaluative, but we're talking about instruction, because I always say there are people in our schools that are amazing practitioners, and we don't take advantage of it. And so this is that question that we live in for our cycle to see if we're having an impact. But if it's not happening, let's not live there. Let's look and say, okay, maybe we're missing something. Maybe we need to do something differently. Do you want to add anything? This is the question I always say, that is what makes the change in our this is what gets results for us. Assignment analysis. I just did this with a high school, and they were humbled, but they were amazing to just be really transparent. They're like, this is my favorite assignment that I do. And we started digging into it. And some found that like, oh my God, I'm not even hitting the standard, or I am just wasting some of their time. And it wasn't like to take anyone down, but this is where we really have those conversations that I believe make the results. And the PLC really grows as a collective here.
And I do want to offer a couple of comments, especially linked to some of the comments that are in the chat. Emily noted that this is her favorite question because this is the opportunity that teachers have to be able to learn from one another. And I think it's always surprising when you ask teachers how often they have been in somebody else's classroom to be able to observe their teaching and to learn from them. And it is minuscule compared to what it could be. It's really hard to spread innovation when everybody remains isolated from one another. And as Alana noted too, those learning walks, and we conduct learning walks, and they are not just administrative team learning walks. These are teacher teams that are doing these learning walks. We get to talk about instruction.
Yes.
And in lots of other PLC models, there's no place to talk about instruction. It's curriculum and it's assessment, but it's not the actual instruction.
And we know that that's the one thing we have control over. And so I always think this is the piece I really feel that it's the game changer. And I'm reading some of the things like teachers get stuck, or, all of us can go back, when we first started teaching and you want to go, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I made you glue all those Cheerios on an O for hours, right? But this is where we get to have those conversations. I love it. We have one teacher per grade. So the first grade teacher is learning from the fifth grade. Oh, I like that, right? Okay.
Alana, hold on, because we are going to absolutely talk about what it's like when you have a school with singletons. We are a school of singletons. We're going to offer you a way of being able to think about this.
Yes. You can go to the next one. This is the question, what did we learn today? And this question to me is the question we should be interacting every time we get together. Because if we just got together and nothing was learned, right? PLC, professional learning community, then we just could have emailed each other and said, thank you for coming. This is the question that a lot of times I think we don't take as seriously. And we want every time we get together as a collective, did we get something from each other? Did we learn something? And question 4, again, we don't have to always go in order. It's not an order thing. And this was a big aha for many people that I work with. But this is checking for understanding not just for the students, but for ourselves as a collective. Assessment of, for, and as learning is where this piece is connected to. Reflecting on our practice, having those honest conversations, and then expert noticings. Sometimes I think we forget that experts do not mean experience necessarily. I've learned that in the last 15 years. And there is a difference between that. Doesn't mean because you've been teaching since Laura Ingalls did. There is expert noticing. So I always say I love myself some newer teachers because sometimes they might have that expert noticing. And then I know I'm losing time. Go, Nancy. And so again, these are part of our processes, looking at collecting evidence, determining the impact, common assessments. Sometimes people will say to me, well, what happens if you can't get people to all agree on it? Well, then if you're using some type of strategy that is all of the same, maybe we bring in some assessment that maybe has been used with that same strategy. We need more time, but we don't. And then this question, who benefited and who did not? Which is not, again, I always say this, we can't wait, I'm having a coughing attack, until the end of the 9 weeks because I don't understand that. If we talk about tier 1 instruction, we talk about RTI, and we're talking all about this in our general ed classrooms and looking at and saying, what is happening and what do we need to make sure that all kids are having some growth and some progress. And I think this question needs to literally live in that piece where are we auditing our equity? Are we looking at supplemental and intensive interventions? Not that it always has to happen outside of our classroom, but what are we doing inside our general classrooms? And so Nancy, if you want to take it away for the last part.
I will. A misconception is that the PLC is the small group of teachers that are getting together. There's actually one PLC, and it is at the school level. The professional learning community is the school itself. There are teams that operate within that, but it's really important to understand that what it is that the teams do and learn about needs to be spread across the organization, across the professional learning community itself. And some of that is really a function of what the team's relative collaborative maturity is. There are teams we know that function well, but don't have much impact. And I think Elisa McDonald's skillful way of being able to encourage us to look at function and impact is really helpful, right? And that, for example, when you've got a team that is low functioning, in other words, they don't work together well, and they don't have much impact, it's often because they can't agree on a purpose and they cannot get out of their own ways because of it. Sometimes there are teams that are like that. There are teams who are high functioning, but low impact. So they use their PLC time, for example, to talk about the schedule for the open house. That's not what professional learning community team meetings are for. That's important to be able to talk about. There's no impact when it is, hey, we're all going to grade papers together or plan the next field trip or do those sorts of things. It's pleasant enough.
I always like to say, don't call it PLC if that's what you're doing.
Right.
We're getting ready for the field trip.
Very good point. Very good point. There are teams that are, in some cases, rather low functioning, but actually have a high impact. These are often teams that are comprised of a whole lot of people who see themselves as independent contractors. They work by themselves, they don't engage in a lot of collaborative work, and they're not especially generous with other colleagues. It's pretty much, I'm really good, I'm good, I'm good, I don't need anybody else, but I'll sit in this room for 55 minutes because that's what's on the schedule. What we're really going for is the collaborative maturity of teams to be able to have be both high functioning and high impact. They have a lot of leverage. They're aligned to those school and district goals, and they're professionally generous with one another. And here's the really important part. They understand what their impact is. And that's where collective efficacy really resides. Now, we're going to show you a video in just a moment, but I want to provide a little bit of background because this is the at the school where Aida and I are. At our school, as I said, we have a lot of singletons. Who said, please show me, who said that a PLC has to be organized by a grade level or by a department? We don't actually organize them that way. We organize them according to a common challenge. And Aida, I wonder if you want to speak to the common challenge that teams have been through for this year around multilingual learners.
Yes. So at the school, I'm charged, or I do, is making sure kids are English learners or multilingual learners are showing progress. And there's a test in California called the LPAC that is definitely my nemesis because I'm using it testing right now. But one thing we know is we need all our team, we need the support of all teachers to help. And so we made one of our I guess I like to call it options of our PLCs, of anyone that was interested on working on having our multilingual learners and really focusing on high impact strategies that can be done in the classroom. And so I know I'm going to be a big bragger, but it has been one of the most powerful, and I'm seeing it right now as I'm doing the testing. Our kids, the teachers took on looking at high impact strategies, not for just the test, but for our kids to have access to content. And we took on making sure that each student, each day in each content area, kids were going to be talking, and not just talking with turn and talks, but talking about graphs and being able to take time to really hone in on that. So we really looked at that for 9 weeks, and it has been a game changer. I don't want to get too happy because then I feel like I'm going to get in trouble. I think that's the game changer, and just the PLC was based on with our multilingual lens. Some teachers went into the lens of looking at study skills, right? And they really wanted to work on getting our kids to be better at that. So there's just, I think the options, and I agree with you, Nancy, there isn't a rule that it has to be grade level or it has to be content specific. What we have found is our teachers really love the ability to have that option. We have one that I think last year, a year ago, was close reading in all content areas. And we dug into that impact because we wanted that comprehension piece for students. We're struggling in all content areas. So I love, you can tell I love PLCs because of just having a group of teachers that are willing to just learn and work and come back and say, oh, it didn't work, or oh, it did work.
And I want to address Kim's comment as we go into this as well. Kim, our professional learning community teams are reconfigured every 9 weeks, not once a year and you're with the same people year after year. And the organizing mechanism is the common challenge. So teachers move from group to group depending on what they want their common challenge to be. So common challenges are proposed by teachers every 9 weeks. And if you can get enough people to rally around that common challenge, that becomes your professional learning community for the next 9 weeks. And you have an obligation to report out to the rest of the professional learning community, the school, what it is that you've been learning along the way. How do you get buy-in? By making sure that it's teacher driven. It's based on their interests and not just the fact that I'm a math teacher or that I'm a 4th grade teacher, but really coming around with a sense of purpose and then making sure that those teams are reconfigured, in our case, every 9 weeks because we're on a quarter system. Other schools will do it every trimester. So let's take a listen at some of the teachers at the school where Aida and I are talking about their collective efficacy.
I think the benefit of collective efficacy cycles is really allowing that opportunity for us to gather around a common challenge in an area where I feel like I need to grow a little bit.
It allows me the opportunity to sit with my colleagues and see how they run things in different content areas and in different classroom spaces.
And then we can look at results from all the different content areas and analyze, okay, why did they do better in this content area than in my content area? What can I do to improve upon it when I give it to them next time?
And it really has allowed me to kind of open up and almost be a little bit vulnerable in my learning, knowing that I have the support of others and be able to bring that into the classroom.
When we focus in on 1 or 2 variables to look at explicitly, it allows me the opportunity to grow my mastery of different approaches to certain kinds of student learning.
And so that collaboration piece across all the content areas just really, really feels nice to be able to let's make this better together.
My group and I arrived at our common challenge of study skills because we recognize that students really struggle preparing for competencies in multiple classrooms. And so we thought, what ways can we determine how students know how to study already, and what can we implement so that students feel more prepared when it comes to taking a competency in any of their classes?
It was really initiated through sharing some student data and thinking about how we teach writing in our classes. And then we decided to really do this deep dive into writing practices and how to implement better writing practices so that all of our students can reflect as writers and improve their writing.
What I did in math is we looked at a problem and we were like, okay, how do we have students answer the problem and then explain their reasoning as to why? And so we talked about things like adding in sentence frames and adding in vocabulary and how we could really build up the students' understanding of reasoning.
I think it's important to be able to take what you're learning in the CEC cycles, apply it in the classroom, be willing to try new things, and be willing to learn from what's not working and then try again.
With these collective efficacy cycles, being able to select what cycle I want to be in was really important in my motivation in contributing to the group.
Nearby, there's a colleague that I can trust, that I can go to when I have a problem in my practice that I really want to address. I know that I can get feedback. It's non-evaluative. I can learn better, I can learn more through their help.
I think it also builds a school-wide community. And when we have a culture of achievement and growth mindset, it really helps push us into a space where we are the best we can possibly be for our students.
The plus really is you. It's what it is that you bring individually and as a collective to what it is that works. To Deborah's point, in an elementary school, it works pretty much the same kind of way. Yes, there are times when a grade level or a department will get together because they've got a common challenge that they're coming together in, but it's for 9 weeks. and we need to have some findings in 9 weeks. At the elementary level, sometimes it may be a grade band of teachers, kindergarten, first grade, and second grade teachers, for instance, coming together to talk about writing and writing progressions as one example. But to the question earlier, how do you get buy-in? We don't need buy-in. We're not used car salesmen. What we do need is commitment. We need a shared commitment. And what that means is that we have to talk to teachers and with teachers to find out what drives their inquiry. What is it that keeps them awake at night? What keeps them thinking closely about their own practice? Kaylee, I know that we're coming up close to the end of our time together as well, and you've got a few things to add as well. And Aida and I have been furiously answering questions in the chat, but we hope that this has whetted your appetite for thinking about new possibilities, about refreshing what professional learning communities look like in your school. Remember, as educators, we write the rules about what it is that works really well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This was fun. Thank you for spending an hour with us, but I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully our paths will cross again. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you both again, and thank you for your time. Thank you to everybody that's joined us. We hope that you have a great night. This ends today's webinar.